Alright, what is good, ladies and gentlemen, is the Themasr reviewer back again with another review, and tonight we are doing a review for Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. This is a rewatch for me, it's in preparation for a viewer recommendation, and yeah, I don't really have any other background to give, so let us just begin starting off with the plot. So the plot is basically that there are these two friends, George and Harold. They love making comics, and they have like very childish toilet sense of humor basically, and they have this really mean principal. I should have mentioned this. Like, this is pretty well known. It's based on a comic book. Not a comic book, but it was based on like a children's book, a novel. Like, not a novel. It's based on the children's book Captain Underpants. That should be pretty obvious. But anyway, so yeah, these two friends, they go to a school where they have this really mean principal, Captain Krupp, and yeah, pretty much the plot is just that they end up hypnotizing him. I'm trying to remember. Like, usually I try to be as specific as possible with the plot of the film, but yeah, this film, it's like pretty. Just some stuff happens at the beginning. Krupp is like being a mean principal where he makes everyone show up to school on a Saturday, and everyone is upset with it. And eventually, George and Harold, they're at this like invention convention that they're forced to be at, and they end up messing with there's Melvin, this like the suck up in class that's like loves homework and like that kind of kid. So yeah, anyway, so he ends up. So George and Harold, they end up messing with his invention, but then he made a nanny cam to basically catch them. Krupp is going to use this evidence in order to separate them into two different classes, and so they end up hypnotizing Krupp into and they hypnotize him. Then they say basically like, when we snap our fingers, you do whatever we say, and it gets to the point where they say, okay, when we snap our fingers, you're going to turn to Captain Underpants, and so that ends up happening. And so yeah, now they basically every time they snap their fingers, Principal Krupp turns into Captain Underpants, and anytime he is hit by water, he turns back into Principal Krupp. So that is like the first half of the movie are like shenanigans and hijinks based on that, and then once you get to like the halfway point of the movie, the villain is introduced, Professor P, who later on you find out his full name is, I'm not going to say his full name because I can't actually remember it, but Professor Poopy Pants, but that is basically his name. So yeah, he is the villain, and his whole motive is that he wants to eliminate all of laughter in the world, basically because he's traumatized by, I guess, his colleagues. Like, he made this shrink ray that's also able to grow stuff, and so he was about to win he won a Nobel Prize for it, but then everyone started making fun of his name, and from there his whole goal is that he wants to eliminate all of laughter so that no one can ever laugh at his name again. So he ends up teaming up with Melvin, and like Harold and George, they eventually do find out about Professor P's name, and they make a comic about it, and so from there they write in the comic that he ends up going to Melvin, Melvin is in the comic, and he's like the anti-humor boy, I'm pretty sure they call him. So that inspires Professor P in order to go actually meet up with Melvin and like use his special neurology in order to create a weapon that is able to just eliminate laughter. So like they apparently in this movie there's like a special part of the brain, the ha-ha, jaffa, chuckleomalus, that is the source of like laughter and stuff. So he basically Melvin, I think, makes a toilet, like I think it was a toilet invention that he made earlier in the film, but Professor P ends up making it much larger, and so yeah, then they basically it basically becomes this like giant robot, and they power it using leftovers from the cafeteria. And so yeah, they have this giant toilet robot that they are using, along with just this weapon that is able to, powered by Melvin's brain, that's able to eliminate the part of the brain that causes laughter and stuff. And so yeah, this leads into the final act of the film, basically, where Professor P uses this weapon with the help of Melvin in order to get rid of laughter throughout the entire school. And yeah, so fight happens, there's some shrinking and some growing hijinks that goes on. Captain Underpants, he ends up getting the giant toilet robot ends up like snatching him, and then putting it's hard to describe this, but the toilet seat opens up, and it's like filled with all the toxic waste. So Captain Underpants ends up there, and George and Harold are actually the ones that defeat the toilet robot itself with the use of like there's a whole fight that goes on with like the shrinking and the enlarging ray. And so they do that, but then so Professor P is seemingly defeated, but then Captain Underpants, he accidentally shrinks himself and grows Professor P to a giant size. And so from there, basically, Captain Underpants is... So I think a fight happens, again, like some more shrinking and enlarging and stuff, and eventually Captain Underpants no, wait, actually before this happens, Captain Underpants, he ends up escaping from the toilet after I think the toilet was defeated, and from there, okay, it's the actual events of the fight, I just saw it, but I don't actually remember the course of events that happened, but at some point, Captain Underpants, from being in the toxic waste, he ends up getting superpowers, he's able to fly, and I guess also super strength he gets as well, and there is a whole, and then there's like a fight sequence goes on, basically eventually gets to the point where they end up defeating Professor P, and so yeah, that is pretty much around where the film ends. They go back to, I would say that it's around where the film ends, but this is when anytime I say that, I'm usually trying to describe the falling action of the film, where it's like that's after the climax finishes, and it's like, okay, now we're getting to like the final like scenes of the film. So you have George and Harold, they're in their treehouse with Captain Underpants, and Captain Underpants is reading one of their comics, and so they decide that they can't keep on going on with having Captain Underpants just being a thing, because he is causing like them way too much, like he's way too much trouble to keep around. So they basically they destroy the hypno ring because they think that would stop Captain Underpants from existing, but instead, if for some reason it does turn Krupp back into it turns Captain Underpants back into Krupp. And so, but later on, by the end of the film, it's like Krupp snaps and he turns back into Captain Underpants, so it didn't actually work. And so the actual end of the film is that George and Harold, they were like, why is it that Krupp is so angry and like upset while Captain Underpants is so happy? And then they realize it's probably because Captain Underpants had friends, which George and Harold. So yeah, they end up doing something nice for Principal Krupp there, like throughout the film, not throughout the film really, but like there were a few scenes in the film where Krupp was shown to have a crush on Edith, the lunch lady, so they put a love letter in each of their lockers, and then leads to them going on a date, which is, that is pretty much, and then the giant toilet robot was dumped in a nearby landfill with a bunch of other toilets, so it leads to mutant toilets being created, and from there, they attack the restaurant that Krupp is at, so he snaps his fingers, and then he turns himself into Captain Underpants. And I guess it's a cliffhanger, basically leading into a sequel film, if there ever is going to be one. This movie, at this point, it came out in 2017, so that means this movie's 9 years old by now. I can't believe that. Actually, I did see this movie in theaters when it came out, so it's insane to think about that it's already 9 years old. So yeah, overall, I maybe left out some details. There were some stuff, there was like a part with a carnival. Anything I left out is probably just like hijinks related to like them dealing with Captain Underpants or some other part that I just forgot to mention. So yeah, at some point they also they go investigate Mr. Krupp's house and stuff like that. There's just a lot of like hijinks that goes on between George, Harold, and just Mr. Krupp / Captain Underpants, like dealing with that kind of stuff. So overall, the plot, I'm going to give it like a 2 out of 5. I don't really care for it. It wasn't that interesting. It is basically, I don't know, like when the plot doesn't have anything to it, the plot is basically just Professor P wants to erase all of like laughter and stuff, and that's not the most interesting plot. And so, to be honest, I read a lot, not all of them, but I did read a good amount of the Captain Underpants books when I was younger, and even then, like, the plots there never, like, I was Diary of a Wimpy Kid, I think those have more interesting plots than Captain Underpants. So yeah, the plot I'll just give like a 2 out of 5. I'll say not good, but not like terrible or anything, like not a 1 out of 5. So I honestly don't know what it's going to take to get a 1 out of 5 in one of my rankings. I'm sure at some point we'll have a 1 out of 5, but just that day is not today. So yeah, the plot, it was 2 out of 5. Didn't really love the plot, but yeah, there were better aspects about the film. So in terms of the characters, I think George and Harold, they were good protagonists, I would say. I think that they have like a very good friendship, I guess, that's portrayed well. And yeah, besides them, I think Captain Underpants was great. He was the best part about the film, in my opinion. So we'll get to that with the best category ranking. So yeah, I think Captain Underpants was good. Krupp as well, I think he was also pretty entertaining. Professor P played a good villain, I guess. Melvin, he was fine. I think that all the characters in general, I would just say Edith, she was another one. Honestly, there's not really that many characters. There's like George, Harold, Captain Underpants / Krupp, which I would consider them 2 different characters. Professor P, Melvin, and then like Edith, and that's pretty much it. So it's like 7 characters, I think, as well as like just some background children or like teachers or whatever. So I would say that the characters overall, they were like, I'm thinking like a 5.5 to a 6, like between decent and above average, and I think I'll go with a 6, I'll be generous. I'll say, yeah, above average characters I would give them. In terms of these settings, it pretty much all takes place in either George and Harold's treehouse or at the actual school itself. I forgot what it's called, Jerome Horwitz Elementary, something like that. So I would give it probably it's a fine setting. It's not really the most interesting. I would give it probably just like a 5.5. I would say a decent setting, like for the purpose of the film, but it's nothing too interesting. I think they actually do go to the city at a certain point in one of the scenes, like in the middle of the film, like for some more Captain Underpants hijinks. None of it looks like that interesting. It's just a 5.5 I would give it. In terms of the visuals, I did since the last video, I do think I am going to start just using this visual category instead of the art style category, because visuals just includes art style, it includes animation, it includes like any just how the film looks in general. So I think that this is just an easier category to do instead of art style. So in terms of the visuals, I think that the art style, it looks pretty good, I would say. I do think that it does capture the whole like style of the books. Definitely, I did say like I think I said like the Charlie Brown, the Peanuts movie. That movie was like a really good adaptation of like what I would want the art style to look like for an adaptation of the Peanuts comics. And I would say that this is not as good. I think the Peanuts movie, I like that adaptation a bit better for the art style. I think this one it's good though. It's definitely, it does feel like it does fit the actual. It feels like a good adaptation of the actual visual comic, I would say. So yeah, in terms of that, I think the animation looks pretty fluid, which I do like. Definitely like a comic book-esque, I would say, animation, which I do think was good. And so overall, I would give the visuals probably just I'll go like a 6.5 to a 7. I'm thinking like between good and, I'm just gonna go with 6.5. I'm gonna say it was good, but it is also like a bit, I don't know, it's very much like a bit more on the childish side, I want to say, of art styles, and I maybe prefer, like I do like the cartoony art styles. I do say a lot, like I don't like the realistic ones as much as like the more cartoonish ones, but at the same time, this one does feel a bit more catered towards maybe children. Not even that it's catered towards children, but it does feel like a bit too comic book-esque maybe. So yeah, I just give it like a 6.5, I'd say, for the visuals. In terms of the comedy, I think that there were, I think the best comedy actually came from Captain Underpants. I think he had the best jokes, the best moments here and there. So that was definitely where the comedy peaked for me in this film. But there are some good lines from, I would say, George and Harold as well as Professor P. They also have some good lines here and there, but overall I think that most of the comedy just stems from like Captain Underpants and the antics he gets into. So I would give I'll go like a 6 out of 10. It was above average. It wasn't like my favorite, but yeah, it was 6 out of 10, I would say. In terms of the worst thing, I would say that the worst thing was probably, I'm not sure. I don't have a worst thing in mind, really. Maybe the stakes. The stakes aren't really that high. The whole thing is that just like it's George and Harold being transferred to different classes. So that's not really the best stakes, I guess. Like the whole threat of the film is that, like, I don't know, just the fact that George and Harold were going to be separated. That's like the motivation for like everything that they do in terms of like hypnotizing Krupp and stuff, as well as, no, pretty much, yeah, just like hypnotizing Krupp and making sure that they can't get in trouble and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm just going to reuse the worst score. I'm just going to reuse the plot score, which was a 2 out of 5. So I'm just going to go another 2 out of 5 for the worst thing. In terms of the best thing, I would say the character of Captain Underpants. I would give him probably like a 7 out of 10. I would say that he was a pretty good character, entertaining, I would say. And so yeah, I'm going to go a 7 out of 10 for Captain Underpants. And I did not write any extra notes throughout this film, so I guess I just had no real thoughts. So other than like everything that I mentioned already. So yeah, that is pretty much all of the score. So I'm going to do the calculation. So King Crimson. All right, so it ends up coming out to about a 5.5, which would be decent. And I think I'd give it a bit higher than that. I think I would go probably like I'd go like a 6 out of 10, I think. Yeah, I'd call it like above average, I'd say. It was, yeah, it had like good aspects to it. Overall, I would say that it was, yeah, I think I'd give it like a strong, like solid 6 out of 10, I would say. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. So if you have any recommendations, any shows, movies, video game stories, anime, manga, web series, anything that you want me to review, leave it in the comments and I will maybe possibly check it out. With that said, that is pretty much all there is to it. So let's leave it at that.